Hi there, I'm Councillor Glenn Gower, and I want to invite you to a workshop being hosted by Ecology Ottawa and Walkable Ottawa, looking at ways that we can improve walkability in Stittsville. You know, when we talk about 50-minute neighborhoods, we have to find a way to establish that, to encourage that across all parts of the city, including the suburbs. So this workshop will help identify some of the barriers and some of the near-term things that we can do to make it easier to get around by foot. It'll be great for the environment, great for our mental health, great for our physical health, and I hope you can join us. See you then.
Hello, my name is Rob Barnes. I am now the former Executive Director of Ecology Ottawa, recording this video from my messy home. Just wanted to say a few words at the front end around the links between climate change and intensification. You know, I know that there's this great workshop that we have planned at the moment, and I hope that you're enjoying it right now for Stittsville. We're really talking about how to build 15-minute neighborhoods. You know, how do we get there? What are the steps that we need to take? And I'm just going to talk a little bit about why it matters from a climate perspective, from an environment perspective. It's not intuitive, right? The idea that, you know, how you shape your city has a major impact on climate change. When we think about climate action, we often think about big things like phasing out oil and gas, or, you know, phasing out coal, or ramping up renewable energy production. We see these pictures of, you know, vistas of windmills and solar panels. All of that is, of course, part of the picture, but the shape of our cities actually matters a lot from a climate perspective. Let's start with Ottawa's emissions, the city of Ottawa's carbon dioxide emissions and other emissions. Basically, there are four main emissions across the community of Ottawa, and the two biggest chunks of the pie, so to speak, usually clocking in at around 45% apiece, are emissions from buildings, or how we heat, cool, and electrify our homes, offices, and other buildings, and then also transportation, basically how we get around the city. And when we think about urban form, it actually has an impact on both of these areas. But before I talk about 15-minute neighborhoods and the importance of density, maybe I'll talk about its opposite, which is urban sprawl. You know, why is urban sprawl so bad? Well, the conventional sprawl model means that people are driving around a lot, right? There's long distances. These aren't walkable communities, so we're driving around. Often paired with larger homes, which require a lot more energy to heat, cool, and electrify. Also, because of the distances too, usually transit is less viable or more expensive, and so transit becomes harder to fund, especially for reasonable prices. And so sprawl, of course, has the additional cost of chewing up green space, chewing up prime farmland, and we don't have much prime farmland in Canada, as you know. So obviously sprawl has a number of negative impacts that we want to avoid. The mirror opposite is these 15-minute communities that are walkable, bustling, dynamic communities, ideally connected by world-class public transportation. That's the kind of vision. And so you've already heard me talk a little bit about those elements, right? Sometimes larger homes are involved with sprawl, and that's a lot more energy to heat, cool, and electrify. But the biggest cost is, of course, transportation. And that's where, when you map, for example, Barcelona versus suburban Houston, you'll see these dramatic differences in terms of compact urban form on one hand and more spread out urban form on the other. And then what you have are just tremendous differences in terms of emissions. And you don't have to look abroad to see these trends. Former Environmental Commissioner of Ontario, Dr. Diane Sachs, included an analysis of the GTA, the Greater Toronto Area, and found those differences just within the Toronto area, right? So that the closer you move in to the core, emissions are much lower, versus the more you spread out into suburban and quasi-rural areas, the more you'll see emissions go up. So the connection is widely observed, but not commonly talked about in environmental circles, and that's why groups like Ecology Ottawa are trying to have that conversation, because we're talking about emissions at the city level, and cities like Ottawa have a tremendous amount of power in terms of how they build their urban form. And cities don't have power everywhere, right? So the jurisdiction is important. The jurisdictional power is important. And that's why we talk about 15-minute neighborhoods. We should build them from an environmental perspective, and building density is a major tool in a city's toolkit. We can talk about the details later, right? The context and the neighborhood and everything else, all those conversations matter. But purely from a climate perspective, the more you build up rather than out is a boon for climate action. Thanks very much, and I'll have another video where I go a little bit deeper on this. All right, back again. Happy to be with you and share some more content around why 15-minute neighborhoods. What is the importance here? What's the climate connection? Let's talk a little bit further, right? We talked about buildings, emissions from buildings, and emissions from transportation, and how those emissions often go up in cases where we see urban sprawl, and they often go down where we see compact, walkable 15-minute neighborhoods, right? And so there's this kind of easy correlation there. But let's talk about the elements that go into making a 15-minute neighborhood. I sometimes joke that, it sometimes sounds, at the very front end, that what I'm proposing is that everyone just live in one big building in Ottawa and then we can call it a day, right? And of course, that's not what I'm proposing, right? There are all sorts of different neighborhoods. There's neighborhood character. There are all sorts of factors that go in to what makes a neighborhood dynamic and walkable. Speaking at the front end about the climate connection and the importance of climate. So it's good to keep that in mind, right? Especially as we think through, how we're going to tackle this problem. There are already tools in the city's tool belt in terms of how it's progressing on these issues. I mentioned emissions from transportation, and obviously urban form plays a major role there. But the city's also working on, for example, electrifying its transit fleet. And you would imagine that as soon as that happens, the emissions from transit go down. And of course, the onset of electric vehicles, and you see more and more on our roads, also means that emissions can go down, even in cases where there are those long distances, right? But so that's one element. The other thing too, I would say, is the electrification of the building stock, and which is to say, first retrofitting homes and building new homes to higher standards so that we're reducing emissions, but also switching out, energy sources like natural gas for things like heat pumps, which are run by electricity and don't emit carbon dioxide, or at least not nearly to the same extent over their life cycle. And so this is obviously, these are directions that cities all over the world are moving. But it remains, I think the urban form question remains important for a number of reasons, right? First, we need all the tools we can to tackle climate change. But two, I'm of the firm belief that you can make a better city while tackling the climate crisis. That this 15-minute neighborhoods is not just some buzzword to get everyone to intensify and densify. That in fact, if done well, the city, all areas of our city, can become much more livable, much more dynamic, and much more vibrant. And this speaks to the 3 pillars of Ecology Ottawa's action plan for 15-minute neighborhoods. So we talked a little bit about density. That's pillar 1, right? The more density, the better from a climate perspective. Great. But, is the implication that we all get into that one building? No. Okay, so let's talk about some of the other elements here. The second is more vibrant communities. And there, what we mean is more mixed-use development. When I mentioned sprawl earlier, we were talking about conventional 1950s, 1960s, 1970s, 1980s sprawl, which is the idea of single-use homes on using large tracts of land, separated by great distances. The new model of urban planning is really around this idea of mixed-use development. How do we embed, grocery stores and schools and shops and other elements into our zoning, such that you don't just have these massive tracts of residential areas separated from all your services, right? You don't have your big box store over here, and then all the people live over here. You're integrating them more and more, and you are seeing that trend, of course, across cities around the world, including Ottawa. So mixed-use development is a key piece, along with density. The final piece that I'll just mention is more transportation choice. Again, we talked about how sprawl involves these large distances, and it basically forces car dependency, makes transit less viable, And it means that you have, basically a car-oriented culture in all areas, so many areas of our city, right? And how do we get away from that? Well, I think that part of the solution too, we're talking about land use planning, we're talking about our built form, but part of our solution is also thinking through mobility options as we build out. Is this density enough such that transit is more viable? Have we considered walkability as a key aspect of community design? And are we embedding things like bike lanes into all new road rebuilds? And are we stopping the kind of car first model where we're always widening highways despite the fact that there's no evidence that does much in the long run to reduce congestion? So kind of rethinking how we approach transportation goes along with increasing density and increasing mixed use development to basically create these 50-minute neighborhoods which have a net benefit on the environment, right? It builds these bustling, walkable communities if we do it right, and then it also stops the boogeyman on the other side, which is urban sprawl. So that's a little bit about the connection between those things. I hope this is helpful, and I really hope that we have a great discussion today in Stittsville. Thanks so much for having me.
Oh, and thank you for participating in the Walkable Neighborhood Workshop. I'm Carolyn McKenzie, and I'm a member of Walkable Ottawa. We're a volunteer homegrown initiative aimed at transitioning neighborhoods into walkable communities. We're happy to be working in partnership with Ecology Ottawa to conduct this workshop in your neighborhood. We've carried out similar workshops in other neighborhoods across the city. Each time we gain greater insight into the workings of unique neighborhoods from a walkable perspective. We try to develop lessons learned about the workshop design and process itself. So keep that in mind as we'll be looking for your feedback after we complete this one. When we say walkable, we're really talking about modes of transport that don't rely on having to drive. We're not trying to get rid of cars, but to drive less, because we think walkable neighborhoods make us healthier, happier, safer, smarter, and greener. Walkable neighborhood is a neighborhood where walking, biking, and public transport are safe and effective ways to travel, where there's enough population density to support nearby cafes and restaurants, hardware stores and corner stores, and more public services like libraries and rec centers, all within walking or biking distance. A walkable neighborhood is also nice to walk in. It's got plenty of green space with trees offering canopy cover and parks that are safe and easy to get to by bike or on foot. It is zoned with more opportunities for small businesses to open and serve the community, and it has homes designed with opportunities for residents to interact, including street-facing balconies and front decks. This helps to create life in the place where the street and the home meet, and it has housing units of different types and sizes that welcome a diversity of households at all stages of life. At Walkable Ottawa, we like to think about all of this as an ecosystem of elements that all need to be present, and they need to work together to make a neighborhood truly walkable. We need enough people and housing to provide demand for local shops and the rationale for the city to invest in public infrastructure like parks and rec facilities. Housing for those people to live in, sidewalks and bike paths for safe movement, and trees for shade, as well as interesting things to look at along the way. Neighborhoods have some common characteristics, but all neighborhoods are a bit different. The people who live in a neighborhood are best placed to identify the challenges and opportunities that should be considered. That's where you come in, contributing your ideas to a local plan that can lead to greater walkability. We're looking forward to a great discussion about enhancing walkability in your neighborhood. Thanks so much for joining us.
Hi, my name's Rosalind Hill. I'm a member of Walkable Ottawa and a residential architect in Ottawa as well. Attached to this email, you'll find the Walkable Workbook for Stittsville Main Street and the surrounding area. The workbook is the outline for next week's workshop with the modules that we'll work through next week. Please open it up and take a look at it. You'll see that some of the pages are marked homework with a due date. We'll need you to do this homework in preparation for the workshop. Full instructions are included in the workbook. You'll find that there are two kinds of activities involved: mapping and learning to calculate urban density. We've included maps of the study area, Stittsville Main Street and the surrounding neighborhood streets. We need you to get walking, bring some colored pencils, and annotate various different features on the map as per the written instructions. It's easy and it's fun, and you are the best people for this job because you know your neighborhood the best. Please, when you're done, scan your work and send it back to us. or just take a picture with your phone and email it to us. We'll gather up all your work to use in the workshop. Next, there's the exercise about urban density. This is the term used to describe the number or concentration of homes or dwellings in an area. It's a useful way of understanding and analyzing neighborhoods. So these exercises will bring you up to speed on this, ready for our discussion. You don't have to send us this work. It's just for you to understand the concepts. Thanks for your involvement. I hope you enjoy your mapping and walking in your neighborhood. See you next week on Zoom.